forgot to do that. I'll do that again. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this Audit and Governance Committee meeting. Sorry we're a bit late because we had to wait until we were quorate. I'll ask Democratic Services to go out to all members again to remind them um, to send in their apologies or and find their substitute. We've had no notification of apologies, so we're still missing two. But at least we can now crack on. We've got a busy agenda, but before we get into that, does anybody have any declarations of interest? No, thank you. If I just now move on to item 2, which is my announcements. I've got 3. I'm delighted to welcome joining us today Councillor Edna Murphy, who is the lead for governance in the combined authority. And we met at our first chat last week over coffee, and I invited Edna to come and join us today so she could see our work. And please chip in as we go along as you feel. Do you want to say just a couple of words about your role, Edna?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, just briefly, I am a county councillor, and as such, I am able to be a member of the Fire Authority. And I am chair of the Fire Authority, and as such, I'm on the Combined Authority. I'm a non-voting member of the Combined Authority, along with the Police Commissioner. And when we had the various events that meant that governance was clearly an urgent issue to address, I volunteered to be the lead member on the Combined Authority. What that means is that I liaise with the officers and I am the sounding board for officers, and I can engage with members and seek, advice and counsel on issues arising. There's been an awful lot of work to do, as you can imagine. You can see on the agenda. I'm very happy to sort of listen and understand what your concerns are and take them back to the board. Equally, I'm happy to answer any questions about how the board is taking to the recommendations and changes that you have initiated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edna. And we've now established connection, so we'll be using each other as a sounding boards when business indicates that would be worthwhile. My second announcement is I'm meeting on Monday afternoon with Richard Carr, who is the chair of the Independent Improvement. There's a meeting, I think, on Monday morning in Peterborough of the board, and then he's coming, going to come and call on me. We're going to have a cup of tea and see how. And so that's a positive thing because I haven't hitherto been able to establish a working connection with the board, so I welcome that, and I hope you do too. And then lastly, an administrative matter. It's the register of interest forms. Some have been received, some haven't. If you haven't done yours, Anne has got some papers, and before you leave the room, if you could kindly fill them in, that would be very kind. Okay, thank you. So now moving on to the minutes of the previous meeting and the action log. Are people content with the minutes as a record? Yeah, thank you. Are there any comments on the minutes? No, thank you. We'll just go to the action log, which I've got to, and then we go to page 14. There are some items open from the June meeting. I just wanted to check all is well here. I think some of these that say that are open are actually closed. Would somebody like to advise?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I could just advise that certainly item 14.4, the internal audit progress report, that one's been closed now because that's now coming to your next meeting that the internal audit recommendations and the audit tracker comes to, which I believe is January now, following decision at the July meeting. And I'm sure that, that Anne can comment on the other three that are open against her name.
Thank you. 5.3 and 17.3 are both being worked on now, and the risk appetite training will be circulated to members after this meeting.
Right. So we move on to item 4, which is the improvement framework. Angela, are you going to go and take us through it?
Thank you, Chair. And apologies if I start coughing. I think, like a number of people at the moment, I've got the lurgy, but it's not COVID. So be assured about that.
Do the auditors need to walk away from you?
I'll leave it to them to decide. I would hate them not to be at work over the next few weeks. So good morning. The purpose of my update for you, as usual, is to provide you with an opportunity to review the progress over July and August on the improvement plan. The detail is set out in the highlight report, which is attached as Appendix 1 to the report. And Chair, I'll just take you through briefly some key points set out in the report, because I'm very conscious that you have a busy agenda today. So first of all, as set out in paragraph 2.2, overall, as determined by the improvement group that is chaired by Nick Bell, the Executive Director for Resources and Performance, it is deemed that the programme is ranked as green at the end of August, meaning that successful delivery of the improvement plan to time, cost and quality appears to be highly likely. So that is positive in that regard. The improvement group also continues to keep an eye on and address any key risks. And over August period, because we had some time, we also looked at all the key dependencies between the deliverables. So we're not looking at one thing in isolation. So for example, SAF, we looked at how that connected and linked to all the other key deliverables. So the group is working well, and the overall assessment of the group chaired by Nick is that the overall programme is green. Running through briefly, governance and decision making, we believe is green. Good progress is being made as set out in paragraph 2.3, and there are items on the agenda, including the appointment of the independent person that was identified as a key element through phase 1. In terms of procurement, in 2.4, again, that is ragged as green, and key documents and arrangements as set out in that paragraph have been agreed. It's been a busy period for taking reports through this committee and through the CA board. So progress has been made on the strategy, the policy and procedures for procurement and other matters. In terms of 2.5 project plans and delivery, this is currently flagged as green amber, although I know my colleagues are champing at the bits for this to turn to green. On the agenda today, SAF, risk management and performance management, is being discussed. And whilst it is ragged as green amber, we're very positive that we are now engaging well with DULAC colleagues and regarding the sign-off of SAF. So we very much anticipate this will turn also to green during this month. Using the governance of the improvement programme, we've left it as green amber, but good progress is being made, as you will hear from colleagues later on in this meeting. Turning to partnership working, it is currently green amber. not because of the progress we're making in our relationships and partnership working, but linked to our focus on what it is that we want to cover off and focus on in terms of partnership working. What we do know is that there is in place now a lot stronger and more collegiate partnership working across constituent councils, and that is evidenced in a range of things that colleagues are involved in. The refresh of the sphere, the conversations on deeper devolution, the future vision, and corporate management colleagues continue to meet with colleagues not only across the constituent authorities but broader stakeholders. So the refocus and scope on partnerships is more about how we work than trying to put in place a real sort of detailed framework in terms of how that is described. And that will be the focus for the activity going forward. So we embed partnership workings through our values, through everything that we do, and it will going forward cut across the range of improvement activity. Confidence, culture, and capacity is also flagged as green. A lot of progress being making in terms of the state of the region review, member development sessions are planned. The CA board development programme is under construction to start in October. And also following, there is also a series of staff seminars being led by executive directors in terms of engaging and involving staff. In terms of values and behaviours, a lot of work is being done on our values, and we are taking the things that came from the last STAP survey, which again we shared at the last meeting, and addressing those with staff and engaging staff in those. The fourth staff conference over the year is to take place on the 12th of October. And again, this is an opportunity to engage and work with staff on the key things of importance and value to the combined authority. And Chair, just to note, again set out in 2.7, it's important that that you're aware of the HR policies that have been approved by the HR committee recently, that focus on equality, diversity, inclusion, and updates to compassionate and family leave included in that. So a really strong set of HR policies, which is good looking forward. Chair, you've already mentioned that the Independent Improvement Board meets again on Monday. The papers, the documents have gone out. The Chief Executive will present a formal report on progress against the improvement plan. And also the CA Board are again joining the IIB with CMT colleagues on Monday to start the conversation around deepening devolution. So that is again positive. As you've shared, Chair, the chair of the Improvement Board continues to meet with key stakeholders, and certainly both the Chief Executive and other senior officers engage on a regular basis with the chair and other members of the IB. And turning lastly to the conclusion of the investigation and safeguarding in staff, it is anticipated that significant progress will be made over September and October, and the conclusion of that investigation being concluded by the end of the calendar year. Chair, that's what I wanted to share with you, but I am happy to take any questions if you have them.
Thank you very much, Angela. Are there questions, comments from colleagues?
Oh, there we go. Second time lucky. General comments. I think it's the format of the report is useful, and it's good to see the RAG ratings being used and generally, and we're seeing a trend in terms of either things are staying at least what they were and generally improving. What I struggle to do when reading through is to get a good overall picture of what things look like. So if I look at the individual reports, I can see a completion date for each activity and a timeline, but I think it would be useful to have a picture that gives like an overall view as to what are the
the key milestones for the improvement project through to completion, because that would, I think, help us understand overall where we're trying to get to. And if you, as I say, that detail is sort of there if we look at your forecast and plans for completion dates. But I think that overall picture would be good. I then one specific question, which was there's mention of potential for a future staff survey. Is there a plan for that, or is that just let's say an aspiration at the moment?
Thank you, Chair. That's a very welcome comment and suggestion with regards to a map that sets out on one page, if we can, the key milestones. I will take that back. We are doing some work on how we produce a document that is more user friendly than what we use as a project team. So I'll take that back and we will share something sort of before the next meeting with you and other key stakeholders. In terms of the next staff survey, it's not an aspiration, it's an absolute plan to do that. I don't know the date of the next one, Nick. I don't know if you do, but this will be the fourth one again.
Thank you. It was mentioned there that that we're holding the staff conference, the next one on the 12th of October. We hope to do another staff survey around that time. So again, this will be something that becomes a very regular occurrence for us to be able to monitor the trends. We don't want to do too many surveys because, of course, that puts a lot of onus on staff to respond. We think it's important that we're able to monitor those. And just to build on what Andrew said as well, just to reassure you and the committee that as officers, every single one, it'd be great to get that plan on a page in terms of the overall dates. But every single one of those work streams has a very detailed project plan sitting behind it that takes us all the way through to January and beyond in terms of the key actions that need to be done to complete those particular work streams. And it's a simply question about how we then get that onto one page so it doesn't sort of create too much almost information for the committee to have. So I just wanted to reassure you that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, in the way we look at these things, we did have this long, just to remind ourselves that we're not trying to double do what the improvement board is. We're trying to understand its progress, but we're actually focused on getting out of the or resolving the concerns by the external auditor and by DLUC. That's that when we debated that earlier, that's where we concluded our focus was best. So I just remind us of that. And I think about staff surveys, its timing is too often, and I can sense that it's about like lifting the plant up to see how the roots are going and killing it in the process. So I leave that to officers. Okay.
Yeah, hi. It's probably similar sort of comments on there, really. But I was just wondering, with the RAG measures on here, get an idea of how they are actually achieved. It's probably similar to what Councillor Inskip was talking about. There's some kind of dashboard that very simply sort of showed the highlight of those items that are making up, especially as some of these sections are coming very close to their completion dates as well. I think it'd be very good for us to get an idea of how they are actually going to achieve those end dates as well.
Chair, very happy to take that back and set out again that RAG rating focus on the key actions that have still got to be delivered. Very happy to do that.
Thank you. On my left before the next.
Thank you. If I may as well, just to address the Councillor Christie's question again, just to reassure the committee that what we have on the very detailed basis is clear action dates that we need to deliver certain things by, and we always ensure that if those are hit, then we know we're on track, and that's what drives the green rating. So there is quite a sophisticated project planning process and project delivery process that underpins this through there. And again, as Andrew Probert said, we're very happy to provide more detail on that to the committee. Thank you.
Jeff, do you?
So I've done it. Yeah, I was looking at under the confidence culture and capacity RAG rating, and I just wondered, I suppose, this comes up later in our agenda, the potential impact of inflation and the change in our sort of funding compact with DLUC. And I just wondered, do feel get enough sort of support from Dulac in terms of, because I can imagine that those two things could, if not treated correctly, be the source of some anxiety for members of staff, or sort of more uncertain future going forward. Are we getting the sort of, direct reassurance from Dulac to the members of staff, for example, to address that?
Thank you. If I could, so the chief executive meets very regularly with colleagues from DLUC and other government departments to talk both through issues in relation to the improvement programme and to provide them with the assurance that they need and to receive their feedback as well. And I believe that he's got his next meeting with them later this month as well. There are a series of regular meetings through there. And certainly the feedback that he receives from DLUC is transmitted as much as possible to the staff to give them that level of reassurance in terms of where we're progressing to. Albeit, of course, as we'll note later on in the paper around financial risk, we continue to make the case to DLUC for additional flexibilities in funding over things like business rate retention in particular. So it's a combination of those, if I could, Councillor Harvey. Thank you.
Thanks, JP. Um, my usual question to Mark, but in this instance, I might ask Edna whether she is happy with progress. It seems from what is written down, it's pretty good progress, but it would be good to be reassured by a member of the board. A particular concern I have is that the progress about investigations and safeguarding of staff seems to be taking longer and longer, with a conclusion being reached by the end of the calendar year. This seems to be dragging on for an awful long time, and I just wonder what the reasons for that are. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could cover the latter of those points before possibly my colleagues from external audit then cover the first. We're hopeful that the investigation and the work on that will conclude over the course of the next few months. As I believe was mentioned in a previous meeting by the monitoring officer, this of course is being undertaken externally and therefore not within our control in terms of the timelines. But we are hopeful that that will be the situation. I can't really comment more at the moment because obviously, as I say, being done externally, it relates to that. I don't know, Edwina, whether or not you'd want to pick up a further discussion.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Nick. Yes, as Nick has said, it's been investigated by an external law firm. I'm in regular contact with them, and they provide regular updates. The last update that I received was that they're hopeful that in the next month or so, or 6 weeks, 8 weeks, they should have something to provide to us. Whether that's a final report or draft, that would be ascertained as we progress. But I will come back to this committee to provide an update at some point, and obviously to any subcommittees that may have to do with any issues arising. Thank you.
Angela, do you want to talk about the other? Oh, sorry, the external auditor, and Edna, do you want to make any comments to the questions from Graham?
Yes, very happy to answer the question. I think what is being done here is really a massive overhaul of the policies, the procedures, the processes, and getting quite deep into culture, and revisiting the constitution, looking at the decision-making process of the board and the thematic committees, and all of that is well thought through and much needed and very welcome, and really provides a good foundation. Having said that, developing the processes that are fit for purpose and could work is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We do have to actually operate those processes, and you can't deliver a better culture overnight. So it's only by following the processes and repeating them and living and breathing the processes, internalizing the principles, that we can improve the culture. But as I say, that is not something that can happen overnight, and it also is not something that can happen without a solid foundation. So I'm as confident as I think it is possible to be that there's genuine change. I do sort of see it at board level, and a sort of acceptance that we do have to do things differently, if that helps.
Thank you, Edna. And Mark, do you want to make a comment?
I can add to that, and I think part of our role is coming to these meetings to hear some of those assurances and to understand what's going on behind the scenes, and regular discussions with Nick update me on those. I think it's fair to say we haven't identified any red flags going through that process, so we're getting as much assurance as you are, Graham, currently, which is reassuring. But it is a journey, as Edna says, and going back to the car analogy, Simon, that we used several meetings ago, I think a roadworthy car with a programmed destination in the sat nav is clearly there. I would say running out of fuel is probably the biggest concern in arriving at the destination, which is the culture point for Edna.
Okay, thank you. I think if I could just pick up on a couple of those things, there is this not the sat nav thing, but it's a tsunami of change. I mean, just trying to read the 276 pages in front of us today, and we have an interest, and to understand it, but we're not going through the process of implementing it. I just wonder if the level of confidence is properly aligned with the task ahead. And it seems to me that there's, and this may be terminology, but if you go to the risk register, risk 6, which is culture, is red, even after the military. And I just wondered if this is aligned with the risk register. That might just be, I know, I mean, he's going to tell us something different. But nevertheless, if you read it as an outsider, in one hand, we're getting quite a big thing. And I think there's no doubt in my mind that the processes and all of that intellectual work has gone on. But it's the turning it into action, which where do we get our confidence on the predictions in that? And is there a disconnect between a risk register, which is just a flood of red blood, with a largely green report that you've given us today? And this is from reading the papers. I'm not questioning what's going on. I know Nick probably wants to say something.
Thank you. If I may, maybe just, if it's not pushing things too far, building on Mark Hodgson's analogy with the car and the route. I think what effectively the improvement program is telling us is that we're on a journey. Let's assume that we're on a journey from here up to Leeds. And actually at this stage, we expect it to be halfway there. And we are halfway there. However, until we're fully at Leeds, the risk register will not necessarily change because there remain risks. There may be roadworks, there may be traffic jams, we may have to detour around us. We don't think we will, but until we're absolutely there, we don't know that for certain. So therefore, that risk will remain red, or likely to remain red, until we know for certain that we've reached the end of our journey on that one, at which stage that risk will then start to come down. So there's a difference in terms of the risk register and the way that is portrayed as opposed to the improvement program. The improvement program is very much about, we're on that journey, we're confident at the moment we're going to reach the end of that journey. But there may still be risks out there. And until we're actually at the end of that journey, that risk register itself will not be tweaked down. So does that help to give you a sense in terms of the difference between the risk register and the improvement plan and how we rag rate that? Hopefully useful analogy, but happy to answer the question if it's not.
Did we say we wanted to go to Leeds? Apologies for being late, Chair. So apologies for that. I was in a different time zone this morning. But I think the car metaphor has been stretched to its limits. But nevertheless, I think we need to define our destination as more accurately in the context of the combined authorities approach. And obviously, I think a love letter from the external auditor might be one of the things that we are looking for ultimately as the destination. But I'm actually concur with some of the comments that have already been made about just the volume of change that's if like needing to be absorbed by the staff and then through their work processes and their learning and how they do things and that cultural change. And as Councillor Murphy said, cultural change is not a quick process. And I think Mark has also made that comment several times during these meetings. It's the cultural change that we need to make sure that all of the procedures and the frameworks are fully operational, and it's basically just becomes custom and practice what we do around here. And I think this is the crucial test that we need to pass, frankly. But that's notwithstanding the phenomenal amount of work that's been done and the sort of like tangible change and sense of progress that is clearly obvious. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to reassure the committee there, hopefully that sense of progress isn't just coming through the external audit, but also coming through the internal audits. I know later on we have the internal audit update through there as well, because obviously that provides separate assurance to you as well. And my apologies for picking Leeds as a destination. It's being a Yorkshireman by birth, it was just one of those places I picked. My apologies.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the car analogies, but I think one thing that's really, I think this is a useful discussion. I think one of the key things for me is if you look at the sort of change management theory, and there's lots of different models, but they all sort of break down into having two parts. That what some term change management and other terms change leadership. And the change management part is getting all of the processes in place, and we're making good progress on that. But the change leadership is the culture bit, and that's the much more difficult bit. And the danger, and there's change management sort of initiatives across multiple organizations. You often find that people focus on the management bit because it's easy to measure and to track and to understand how you're doing it, and I would say it's easier to do than the leadership. And I think it's really important that we make sure that both those things are together, because there's a danger that you think you're done because you've got those processes and procedures and that, and you've set out how the organisation should work. But unless that's everyone is living that and bought into that, the thing will fail. So I think it's important we bear that in mind.
I agree with that, and I one thing I should have added is that as far as the board is concerned, I think everyone is very conscious that it's not just the chief executive and the mayor that need to model this behaviour, but also all members of the board. And that's without taking away people's freedom to represent their their residents as they see fit. But there is a real a challenge there to all the leaders to really model and lead on the behaviours themselves. That is a challenge that I would say. My personal view is I think people accept that is what's needed. So that is a really important step as well.
Thank you very much, Edna. Before I say, I've got a couple of questions, Angela, in the text on page 16. I was interested in the draft management performance management framework has been socialised, which it's an interesting new word for me. But at the bottom of that paragraph, it says that the draft performance management framework was going to be shared with audit and governance today. Don't think we have it on the agenda. I just wondered what the intentions were in that regard. That's on page 16 at the bottom.
Thank you. Is performance management not on this agenda today? My understanding was it was.
Thank you. I think just waiting for the mic to come on there. Performance management framework is actually going to over in scrutiny committee in advance of the CA board. So it's not on today's committee agenda, but certainly I think it would be good to give an update on the performance management framework to our next meeting that we can bring through in the November meeting of that.
Thank you, Nick. I think it's been a good discussion, and I think the sense of it is that the task of turning all the managerial change into day-to-day practice is something I'd ask you, Angela, and the team to think about ways in which you can try and get some assurance about how behaviours are changing. I mean, it's as it appears else in other papers. I mean, that training is being rolled out, whether it's on procurement or whatever, but training is an input. So I invite you to think about how you can be actually doing the stuff, and how is that going? I mean, there are I mean, in other lives, there's cultural surveys you can do to get a cultural analysis rather than what I feel about my job at the moment. It's a staff survey thing. I haven't got the answers, but I think the committee would welcome some thinking on that regard for our next update. Okay. Otherwise, thank you very much for that. And one can't but admire and respect the amount of effort that's going in to get us into the right place in our journey, even if we bypass Leeds. Okay, thanks. But next, I should just say that we've now used 45 minutes of time, and there's a lot lies ahead, and I do want to make sure we finish by 1 o'clock. So, if when we get to things which are more for information, we try and move those through without not in any way undervaluing what's in front of us, but we should use our limited time on the stuff which is more novel, I think, if we're reassured just by reading the words. Okay, so and that's a sort of lead into item 5, which is an update on the member protocol. Edwina?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Members remember that this report came to the last committee meeting, and at that stage, a recommendation was being sought to the CA board to approve the member officer protocol. There was a debate around paragraphs 2.15 and another paragraph in the report, which had to do with members contacting junior officers. When the report went to board, the board had the same discussions, but then agreed that this committee should have the final approval. The reason is because I'd advised the board that the Audit and Governance Committee, under the Constitution, is responsible for implementing the obligation to ensure high standards of conduct amongst members, and also to ensure that we had policies dealing with those member type issues. So it is for this committee to approve the member officer protocol that's attached to item 5 as appendix 1. You will note there that the resolution that was made by this committee at the last meeting in July have all been implemented. So at the last meeting, the things you asked for was that there should be reference to the civil values. That's now in the protocol. Also, you've asked that the questions around contacting junior officers, those have been amended. So the main issue really is to do with paragraph 2.15 and I think it's 4.17. I would just double check that. The wording has been amended if you're happy. Paragraph 4.7. If you're happy with the wording as it is, then you can approve the protocol. That's a recommendation before you. Unless there are any questions, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Adina. Are we happy to approve, or do we have any questions? Andy?
Thank you very much, Edwina. I know you struggled to try and get this one right, and I know the issues from oversight and scrutiny as well. The top three tiers, how do you know if an officer is in that top three tier when you're contacting them direct? It's just really the practical aspects of how, when you receive a report, where does that officer sit in the structure? Can you speak to them directly? Should you go to their director? It's just a little bit of extra detail in the reports themselves, I think, would probably help to make sure that you're not unintentionally contravening the process by trying to contact the officer that's authored the report who might be junior. That was just my point, really. I think we need to be very clear. Also, if an oversight and scrutiny member rapporteur, for example, wants to go and speak to particular areas, they will be talking to junior officers because they'll be doing that with the director's approval, I suppose. And that bit isn't covered either, but I assume that this is not so much of a problem because you've already gone through a director to make that approach. But those are just the 2 points I had from the addenda.
Thank you, Councillor Coles. Those are very useful comments. With regard to the top three tier, there was an email sent out with the induction pack, I believe, to all members. But if you haven't got that, we'll resend it to all members so you can see the top three tiers of the combined authority. And in answer to your second question, whilst you've said it's not an issue, but the way that I've reworded the paragraph, it's recognized that there'll be occasions when members need to contact officers. It's just what happens. This is mainly to ensure that junior officers don't feel pressured. So it's that protection for officers, also recognizing that members may need to contact junior officers. And I've tried the best I can to sort of deal with those two issues. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry.
Just one very quick comment. So I'm happy with the content and agreeing. I just wonder whether we should, as part of that, agree out to a review in, I don't know what, maybe 1 or 2 years, just to see how it is working, rather than this be something we agree now and then it sort of gets forgotten about. But maybe we should have a plan in a review.
Thank you, Councillor Inskip. Yes, that's a really good suggestion. It's how long do you want to review it? The first one was, I believe, approved last year, and this is a review a year after. Whether you want to carry on reviewing every year, or my suggestion would be every 2 years. Otherwise, there really isn't. Unless there is something that happens that requires a review before then.
Yeah, I think 2 years makes sense. Otherwise, I think if we keep it too short, you're updating the last one, and the next one, having only just released the previous one. So 2 years sounds like a good period.
Thank you. So on that basis, we're content to approve, noting the comments regarding the need to make members and staff aware of the three tiers of within the organisation, and that we'll have a look at an update in 2 years' time to go on the work plan. Happy? Right, there was one other point. It said in 3.3 on page 38, Edwina, it talks about a report for the November meeting. I'm afraid that slightly eluded me. What was that's going to be about?
At the last, at the July meeting, I believe one of the members on the day requested for context around the member officer protocol, but that's not available now because it's sort of linked to the investigation. So we're waiting for that to be resolved before I can bring a report setting out the background and the context to why the member officer protocol became necessary.
Thank you. Are we still wishing that work to be done when the, or shall we? No, shall we delete that requirement because there's enough on their plates, and we will get an update when the or what happens after the case has been resolved. Are we happy to do that? Thank you. Thank you. Well, that you've got because I wasn't talking. I'll do again. Item 6, we've got the risk management framework, which we're asked to recommend to the board to a deep dive into how risks are managed and the July risk register. And who's going to introduce?
If I say a few words first. Yes, thank you. So as the chair rightly says, this covers a number of issues all related to risk. I'll be asking one of my colleagues who's joining us online, Rob Emery, the Assistant Director of Finance, to cover the deep dive on the financial risks. And I'm joined as well by Chris Bolton, the Head of the Project Management Office, Programme Management Office, who will cover some of the detail behind the procedure and the framework if required, and then also the July risk register. But just a few words to introduce it, if I may, first of all, which is that as part of the improvement programme, again, revitalising and refreshing the way we approach risk and manage risk effectively was a key part of the work that we've undertaken. And the draft framework and the procedure here, which are intended, following on from this meeting, to go to the board on the 20th of September for hopefully their approval, are two key parts of that. The framework has been reviewed, and the intent is to review this regularly again in the future, and probably again on a 2-yearly basis rather than annual one. Through there, but it's been reviewed with expert input from RSM, and we have used extensively colleagues from RSM to help to develop this through, it's very much linked in terms of best practice. It also includes, for the first time, a draft risk appetite that's been developed by the corporate management team, looking at the types of risk that we face and where the appetite as an organisation falls in each of those. And that will help us to be able to manage risk better as well in the future, and to understand where we're able to tolerate more risk and where we need to really tightly manage risk through those areas. That's the framework. The procedure itself is fairly straightforward. It's a guide. It's a guide to officers and to members as well, and also any stakeholders who are interested in it, into how we actually operate that risk management framework and that risk management process. We're developing some new software called 4Risk that will help us to be able to do that on a more regular basis, and that's in place and is being developed and will be rolled out over the course of the next month or so. So that's probably all I wanted to say in relation to the overarching report. Before passing on to Chris, if he wishes to say anything in more detail, and then opening up to questions before we then go into the more detailed look at the July risk register itself, and then my colleague Rob Emery, as I say, going through the deep dive in terms of the finance risks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nick. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all again. Nick's done it all, really. You've covered it, really. I suppose that from our point of view, the committee is well aware of the work that we've been putting into risk over the last year, in particular, when the responsibility for the risk register and corporate risk moved across to us. What we try to do is pull that all together in the framework, so everyone understands all the things that we're looking at, going back to the governance piece from earlier, the need to sort of really get a nice risk culture right across the organisation. So moving into that embedding risk across all levels, from corporate down to programme and so on. We've done some work on sort of roles and responsibilities. As the committees are aware, we've done the risk appetite statement with the CMT. We've shared with you guys as well. In addition to that, we're using that risk appetite to look at our scores. So, for example, if you've got a financial risk, and we're being quite cautious for good reason. Therefore, if once we've had a look at the sort of likelihood and severity when we score the risk, if it's over that risk level, going back to the risk appetite, that's a real pointer for anyone involved with the project or the programme that needs to be escalated. What we've also done as well, we mentioned, Nick mentioned it earlier, with regards to our reporting, particularly at corporate level, is much improved. The organisation now uses the same template at all levels. So any project or programme that kicks off, as soon as they move into delivery, they'll be expected to be using this risk register. That's not to say that there's not work that needs to be done there. So it's not all a perfect rosy picture. We know at corporate level, we think the risk reporting is much better. The corporate management team have really sort of taken on their role at looking at the corporate risk register. In preparation for the sort of enhanced reporting via the software for risk, we've been doing preparation for that. We've been gathering the information in the programme level or service level registers, and there's some work that needs to be done there. Just to back up some of the work, obviously you know about the training that you guys have received, and as Anne mentioned earlier, we'll be running another risk appetite session for the new members. Nick's absolutely correct with the procedure. It's just telling you how you need to be reporting risk or levels, who's responsible, the role of the board and committees, and so on. I think we've done well. We've made progress, but it's that embedding piece that needs to come next. I suppose the last thing I'd just like to add with regards to sort of the management framework and the procedure, what we've also done is implement the lessons learned log. Now, it existed in the past, but it wasn't used. Now, again, we've got some software where any project is either in train or in delivery or is finished when there's project closure, and we receive those documents, we have a lessons learned exercise. So, for example, recently we've done one with AIU, the University of Peterborough, for some of the work that they've done there. Okay, should we stop there and take any questions on the framework or the procedure, and then maybe we'll dip into the register afterwards?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. Because this item is, we are asked to recommend this framework goes to the CA board for approval. So yes, let's do that bit of work before we go on to the other two items on the end. Any comments on the framework or questions? Clearly, mine plea to move business quickly is had an impact. The quiet I think you can take is you've convinced us. And I must say personally, I'd never ever seen before in all my dealings with risk the way a risk appetite has been set out in the way that it is in here. I think it's absolutely crystal clear what is meant and the approach is taken, and I think it must be a valuable addition to the policies on how staff do the framework. So we do recommend to the CA board that they adopt the framework. Oh, sorry, maybe we don't.
Oh, that one looks better. The reason I was a little bit slow is 'cause it's quite a big document. I was scrolling back through to see whether I did have any questions. Just to sound that the risk appetite. So I do think that's a good approach where I've seen some organisations have a one size fits all, and I think the approach here to look at different areas and adjust the risk appetite appropriately makes sense. Just one bit of clarification so I'm on page 60 of the agenda pack. So 3.2 roles and responsibilities. It talks about the corporate management team reviewing risks on the register on a monthly basis. It then talks about executive directors and heads of service are accountable for service level risks within their remit and project managers for project level risk registers. It doesn't stipulate the frequency in which they review. Is the expectation that they also do that at a monthly cadence? Yeah.
Okay. With that comment, then we recommend. No, now from silence we've gone to great animation.
This relates to figure 2 on page 63 of the agenda pack. And what we've got there, we've got caution on, if like, the supporting governance arrangements, as just put it like express it like that, like finance, compliance, regulation, culture, confidence, data management, partnership. But a more open approach to people, service design delivery, and program projects. So a kind of a more open, innovative approach is sitting on a bedrock of caution.
Simon, could we? But this is the why. It's not our job to question the judgments.
Okay.
It's our job to say, is this a process that is meets a risk management framework? I mean, another forum, I think, for asking them why they chose this one or that one. It's just not our business.
Okay.
As much as we'd like to know why they've done it, and I'm sure I'll now be told, which will help, but we must remember.
Thank you.
Thank you. I actually wasn't going to go into the data because this was done on a 3 or 4 hour workshop by the whole of CMT, which was linked in with RSM again, facilitating that particular one. But I was going to say that we would expect this to come back on a regular basis, and that risk appetite potential to change as the organisation develops and matures, the context changes externally. That's why we need to keep looking at that risk appetite to set that on a fairly regular basis. We felt that this, given the context of the organisation, was a CMT view, and senior managers, given the context of the organisation that we're in at the moment, was a good set of risk appetite to propose and to adopt. But in the future, as I say, that may change depending on how the context of the organisation, externally and internally, changes.
Thank you. Try again.
Just a quick question to the committee. How often would you like us to report to you? Do you want us to meet to report every meeting, or maybe every second meeting?
Can we leave that until we get to the July risk register? Because that's about the frequency of seeing the risk register, not about the framework. And when are we due to see the framework again? Annually? Is that the proposal?
If I may, I was suggesting that we could either bring it annually or we could bring it once every couple of years. In terms of the framework itself, we'd probably bring an update to the risk appetite annually because that may change on an annual basis. But in terms of framework itself, that's unlikely to change annually. And I think maybe one every couple of years might be more appropriate, but it depends on what the committee wants.
Are we happy to take that advice? Okay, good. Yes, and as we get on to later items, we'll see that other forums like this manage to meet 4 times a year, and we're struggling at 6. So clogging the thing with lots of updates is not something we should recommend. Okay, thank you. So now we'll go on to the deep dive. Now, remembering this is a pioneering idea for us to try and understand the process by which the leads for corporate risks work out and manage the risk judgment that they make. It's not about questioning the judgments that they make. And this is a learning process, and we've got a lot of paperwork in front of us, which probably gives rather more on your judgments rather than on your mechanisms. So as you introduce it, with that feedback in mind, can we try and focus the discussion on the how this is managed at the corporate level rather than the individual reasons why you ended up in a red or a blue corner?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Happy to do that. I was also interested to see that over the weekend there was some local press interest in a very dry dive into a corporate risk register, which is very gratifying to see that there is some interest outside these four virtual and physical walls. I just wanted to clarify that it's a factual-based report. The things that are in there are levers and options that the combined authority does have open to them. It's in no way a statement of strategy or intent that they are going to be relied upon in the future. So bearing what you've just steered me in mind, Chair, and indeed the previous steer about getting through things at pace, I'll focus on sort of, as you might expect, aren't exactly news. And when the corporate risk register was refreshed and this new version was implemented, these were actually risks that were carried forward from the prior existing risk register. So in our new risk framework, they didn't follow through the new escalation route as you might expect. They were pretty much brought in, ready formed from the previous one. Although the meeting of the Performance and Risk Committee at the time, there was a sort of straw poll of officers as to whether people thought they should be transferred, and it was unanimously agreed. In terms of the practical management of the day-to-day or the month-to-month, I should say, of how the risks are reviewed, I meet with Chris, who I know is sitting in front of you, and we basically talk it through. And we go through what's currently on the risk register. We look at the factors that are identified already within the risk register of what the risk is, what influences it, and we consider whether any of that's changed. In particular, one of the risks, the future funding one, that was originally had an element in it talking about our core gain share funding from government, because following a letter from government last year, it was unclear for a while whether we'd receive that funding. That made that risk far more urgent, because without that funding, we'd have been at risk of being unable to operate. Once that funding came through, that then became, that particular element of the risk, we reviewed it, we took it off, we went back to Performance and Risk Committee, discussed whether that changed the overarching risk itself, the scoring, etc. So we are horizon planning on a monthly basis as we review the corporate risk registers or the risks on the corporate risk register. We also, at the same time, discuss what the mitigations in place are, what actions have been taken in the last month. A lot of them on the corporate risk register, particularly ones around funding, tend to be sort of long time horizon risks, whereas a project risk that might have been escalated up to the corporate risk register due to its size might come and go because there's a very important high critical point during the project delivery. These sort of corporate finance ones, as you've seen, have been on here since inception and still are. The scores will change. You'll see, hopefully, the actions and the mitigations evolve over time, reflecting our progress on them. The target risk score, I'm sort of mentally working my way across how the risks are presented. We tend not to review that on a monthly basis because it's fundamental to the risk. It is discussed less often, but still regularly, in terms of, is there any change to where we would like our future funding certainty to be, where we could reasonably get it to. But I would say it's not focused on in quite the same way on a month-to-month basis, because unlike the actions and the surrounding economic environment, it's less subject to change. I'll pause there, and I'm happy, Chair, to take your steer on whether you want me to bring anything specific out of the report itself or to move on as the committee and the Chair like the questions.
Shall we take questions?
Yes, it's just an observation. Really, I think the document itself does really clearly define what mechanisms are available. For me, within this group, be more interested in how it is decided which action to take, and from a governance point of view, decide which action to take and when that action should be taken.
Yeah, I can absolutely address that. It's very dependent on what the action is, I suppose, is the very short answer. In a bit more detail, thinking about some of the ones that are in the report, where they are, where I've talked about funding options, for example, those are decisions for the combined authority. So during our medium-term financial plan, it's something we're doing at the moment. We look at the next 4 years, we look at what the currently committed costs of the combined authority will be, what our known income and expenditure is, and that gives senior leadership a view of the overarching position, our forecasts over the next 4 years. That's then when you'd have that discussion of this is the baseline with whatever assumptions are built in, and you'd discuss those assumptions on funding and expenditure. That then feeds into the draft MTFP that comes through in November and is consulted on with the public and various other statutory consultees. And then ultimately those sort of strategic level funding decisions are made by the Combined Authority Board, if it is a corporate approach, at their January meeting when they approve the medium-term financial plan. There are then significantly less strategic parts to that, the softer side of things. When do we have when do we call a rail summit? When we realise that the Ely Northern Junction needs to be highlighted and really focus the government's attention on it. That obviously doesn't require a month-long process for the Combined Authority Board to develop their programme. That particular one would be done through discussion with stakeholders of what the key priorities are, what the blockers to our strategic objectives are, looking at our, in that case, the local transport and connectivity plan or similar documents for other areas, depending on the target of that. So it can be anything from an operational matter where it's say a project risk to one that can be part of a long-term 4-year planning cycle. I hope that was a bit of a broad answer, but I hope that addresses what you were after.
I think Rob's given a very, very sort of full explanation. The only other thing I would add as well is, of course, we do have a corporate strategy and plan in place, and the corporate strategy and plan drives the actions that Rob was talking about for the medium-term financial programme, all of which are consulted on and then approved ultimately by the main Combined Authority Board.
Swap them around, so I've got the working one now. One question I've got, it sort of comes back a bit to the risk appetite discussion, because let's say on finance we're being cautious, but if I then look at the risk register, we've got inflation, which is, it's very high. I know that if you then, I can see that you've reduced the risk a little bit, but the residual risk remains very high. And it's quite a long way from, we've got a target of high. So how do you reconcile, but inflation, again, is something that is really, a lot of that is outside of your direct control. There's some steps you can take, but there's a limit to what you can do. So how do you then reconcile those issues where you've got a risk that you're limited in what you can do to reduce it, but at the same time it's in a category where you're really you have a really cautious risk appetite?
I'm happy to take that. So basically, by giving it as much attention as we can and reviewing frequently what we can do, as the members mentioned, we have limited control over broad-scale economic inflation. So it is more actively, more frequently reviewing our actions on that and making sure that we are recognising where there are opportunities, where there are threats as well. In particular, opportunity at the moment is with the devolution round 2 deal. There's an opportunity there to potentially agree the devolution of locally retained business rates, which would bring £60 million a year into the combined authority, or sorry, not the combined authority, the area, to be shared with local authorities throughout the area. That funding would be linked to growth and inflation, and therefore could provide a long-term solution. So it is ultimately, there is a dichotomy there. We want to be cautious about it with our decision making, and we will aim to take those approaches. But ultimately, you have to rely on the fact, you have to acknowledge the fact that many of parts of it are out of our control. And I think I saw Nick signal there that he wants to come in.
Thank you. Just to maybe give an example in terms of the cautious approach to finance. Obviously, the committee before will have had, I can't remember if it was last meeting or the one before, training around treasury management with Ireland Closer advisors. Obviously, if we took a less cautious approach to there, we might be saying we're happy to use some of our capital to look for higher returns. But we're taking a more cautious approach there, which says that actually what we want to do is to maintain our capital, but still to look for a reasonable amount of return through there. Because what we don't want to be in is a position where potentially we don't then have the funds to be able to deliver what we want to do. So that's the reason why we're taking that cautious approach to finance. But I absolutely agree with Rob, it is that bit of a dichotomy. But what we're looking at as well, as Rob rightly mentions, is opportunities working with government to be able to develop some sort of new opportunities for additional funds to come into the area, particularly that business rate retention one, if we could get that for a Devo deal, would be quite significantly changing, but not for just for the combined authority, but for the area as a whole.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question I have. Perhaps I'm reading too much into a very brief statement, but I was just wondering about precept raising powers and how that fits in with the risk register in terms of meeting some of your financial needs in that process. And we've seen it in the transport plan, obviously. Is there any plan to use it to protect other areas of business?
If I can maybe pick it up, because I think that would obviously be a policy decision taken by the mayor and then the combined authority board. Certainly within the MTFP at the moment, which has been developed, there are no proposals for that, but it's a very early stage in the MTFP, and I think that would probably be a question more for the mayor and the combined authority board rather than for officers. As Rob rightly says, all we're doing here is laying out a range of options that are open to the combined authority, as opposed to any particular policy decisions that would be taken, because that lies out with our responsibility. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a few points. I think you've given the reassurance about the methodology that you use, and there's a mixture of judgment and data, and somewhere in this I was struck when I highlighted it. It is very unlikely that the combined authority will actually find itself with so few funds. So this is a debate which risk management, I mean, that is reassuring. What I'm less sure about is how judgments are made when you land in the red zone as opposed to another zone. What we have is a combined authority where 2/3 of the risks are red. And now I've never been in an organization where that was the case, because the point of the risk was to focus urgent priorities. So is this risk really a red risk? How do you arrive at a red risk, as opposed to this is always difficult? It's really in the medium area because it's not a crisis. And are we sending the right signal by where it ends up with a score? And how do you work your way through to convincing yourself that this is a score which reflects the dangers to the authority and actually tries to allow management to understand that some areas are being managed effectively, and we don't need top level risk management, which a red score implies to me is meeting.
Chair, could I jump in there just before Robert speaks specifically about the risks that he's brought in the deep dive? With the obviously that
you are.
Sorry, it's Adam Licorice from RSM.
Go on.
It was just regarding the risk matrix and the amount of red on there. Part of the changes that have been proposed in the procedural document are that the matrix and the colours and the definitions that sit behind what constitutes a 5 impact, a 4 impact, etc., have been revised as part of this review. So it's anticipated that at the next risk report that you receive, of all of the corporate risks that are on there, there will be significantly less red risks because the red area of the matrix is in essence shrinking to allow that prioritization to occur. I mean, Rob's score of 20 will still remain red just because of where it sits, but actually, you'll see a shift there in terms of how to focus on those more important issues. I just wanted to add that in. Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Mick wants to say something, but then I've got to.
Thank you. Just a bit on your comments as well, if I may, Chair, in relation to urgent risk as opposed to maybe longer term risk. I think what we're trying to do for the strategic risk register is try and deal with both, although many of the immediate risks are dealt more with as operational risks rather than necessarily the longer term strategic ones. So, for instance, the one you pick up around funding there, you're right, we can't necessarily do anything in the short term. But the issue is that if we don't focus on this in the long term, it becomes a potential existential issue for the organisation, i.e. if we did run out of money at some stage in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, how many years, it would be difficult for us to function and do the work that we were required to do for the benefit of our communities across the whole of Cambridge and Peterborough. And therefore, keeping office a focus on this when actually some of the actions and opportunities are longer term is still very important. Because actually, if we only look at what's here and now as immediate risk, then we fail to, I think, to potentially look at some of those that are coming down the line towards us, albeit that much further away. So hopefully that gives a sense, I think, in terms of why it's red and why it continues to be red through there, because it is meaning that we've got to put that additional focus still as officers in terms of trying to find solutions for this, albeit some of those solutions might be slightly longer term than they are for more immediate risks.
Thank you. I'll close it in a minute. I just give you an example. What you're talking about is impact. If all goes wrong, the combined authority will collapse. When I was in the British Antarctic Survey, the biggest risk we had was death. But it was not red. It was green or amber because we were managing it. And we expected the risk owner to move it up the scale if he felt the management of avoiding death was not doing properly. And that meant that the board focused on the ships were broken, which wasn't a high impact risk ultimately, but it was the thing that mattered. So we used it, in my experience, it's been using it to try and sort your mind at the strategic level of the things you should be looking at now. So do you think, in your own mind, Rob, as the lead, your judgment as the lead owner, are you actually in a red situation today?
So I would say yes, but not because I expect there to be a sudden fundamental change in our approach to risk and inflation and going and hedging our treasury management funds, but because, as you say, this risk is there to highlight, to keep it on officers' radar, to make sure it's involved in all their decision making. And I think that is necessary with this risk, because so many of those controls are related to everyday operations of the authorities. When we talk to central government, when we talk to civil servants, what are we saying our priorities and our risks are? And I know certainly with the conversations I have and when we represent the M10 finance network, that is a key risk. We are constantly reinforcing the message to government that we have a long-term unsustainable funding solution. And so while there's no immediate resolution possible, well, within our control, it is something that informs day-to-day decision-making and messaging.
Okay, thank you. And it's not for us to judge the judgment. I think what we've had this morning is a very useful understanding of how this is done, and which is reassuring in itself. Unless there's an urgent comment, I'll move on. There's one here.
Well, I'm not sure if it's urgent comment, but I disagree with Rob. I think that having so many red residual risks is not helpful. And I look forward to seeing Adam's prioritisation, reducing that list significantly. I think that will be helpful for management, but I agree with you, JP, it's not for us to determine which ones necessarily are the ones. We all have our own views, but it's not for us to express them today.
Okay, thank you. I'll draw that to a close. Thank you very much for the thinking that went into this. I think we would like another deep dive, say, in the new calendar year. And I would ask you to reflect on the nature of the conversation in to focuses on the sorts of things that are with the committee. But thank you, Rob and Nick.
Thank you, Chair and Committee.
We're now going to the last bit on this item, which is the review of the July register. And Chris, you want to say anything?
The committee is all quite used to looking at the new refreshed register. Just to add one point to the discussion around the risk, particularly the red risk in the residual column. A point that Adam made earlier around the definitions that have been changed for the new framework, the new procedure. So as it stands at the moment, before the new procedures counted and the new scores are on there, at the moment, any financial risk that's more than £300,000 will always be classed as critical. So if you look at some of the risks here and you have a look at the finance scoring matrix, even with the mitigations in, it's likely to be over £300,000. Therefore, it's usually critical. Now, we've changed that. Rob and I have had a look at the projects right across the board, the whole capital programme, and we've put new definitions in that are more realistic. So to be a critical sort of financial risk, for example, now it will need to be over £5 million, and so on goes down. So I think that will help with the red risks as well. So I expect, assuming that the framework and procedure are approved, when we come back to you in November, you will see a different risk register.
Thank you, Chris. Any comments? Okay. And I think we need to think about the frequency that we look at the risk register, and maybe when you come back in November and we see the new shape, I'd ask you to give us a proposal how often you think we should be reviewing it, and if you could get some best practice input on that as to because we really just don't want to keep painting the fourth bridge if we're not adding value. Okay, thank you. I'll close that item then. Thanks a lot. Right, we now move on to item 7. Jodie is going to take us through the single assurance framework. This is a big piece of work. We're asked to endorse, or is it word I'm uneasy about, for the endorse what's put in front of us for the Combined Authority Board, and then particularly to have a look at the draft investment committee and investment panel proposals. I'd be grateful when we get to the debate as to whether we choose to endorse the words or the approach. There's a lot in this, Jodie, so even your covering paper makes the head hurt, never mind what's attached to it. So treat us gently.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. And yes, apologies for that. It's a big item. The report and appendices seek to provide the information to assist you in your consideration of the draft Single Assurance Framework, or the SAF, as it is commonly referred to. Section 1 of the report sets out the ask before you, that is to consider the draft SAF and provide feedback that can go to board when it considers the SAF on the 20th of September, when it will be considering whether it is willing to approve the document for submission to government. So the SAF itself, it sets out the systems and processes designed to provide the combined authority with a consistent approach to appraisal, assurance, risk management and performance throughout the life cycle of projects and programmes. Section 3 of the report sets out the key detail regarding the content of the SAF. The SAF is based around 3 key phases. Phase 1 is entry point initiation, Phase 2 is development, and Phase 3 is approval. These phases are based around proportionate delivery of HMT's Green Book standards and informing and assisting decision makers from a technical assurance perspective throughout the process. The SAF is built around something we're calling the principle of approval that board has specifically requested. That is that no project enters the business case development phase, which is Phase 2, without board having approved it to do so either through adoption of the corporate plan or through approval of an in-year concept. The SAF seeks to deliver ever-increasing level of assurance as the level of financial approval requested increases. It does this through the 3 key phases, the criteria they apply, and the documentation that is therefore subsequently required. Engagement in the development of the SAF has been absolutely key and played a significant role in determining its content. The SAF has been co-produced in parts with constituent council officers through the partner working group, who have provided constituent council perspective on need and function of the SAF, particularly on some of the detail of supporting templates and criteria that will sit around this framework. The partner working group members have had a role of ensuring they brief their own officers and councillors in their own constituent councils as part of this development process. There has also been an internal working group to engage the relevant CA business areas and engage it with the M10 assurance group to ensure comparison work and we can share best practice throughout the development stages. There has been regular engagement with the lead member for governance throughout the process, who has provided test and challenge as well as guidance and support. The Public Service Board, which includes all constituent council chief execs, and the Leader Strategy Meeting, which is the informal meeting of board, have also regularly been engaged throughout the process of development. Both of those bodies have provided key steer to the development process and have recently considered the draft SAF document. Following the most recent meeting of the Leader Strategy Meeting, there has been a request for an addition to be included in the document. That addition is as follows. Where a concept is proposed that is specific to a single constituent council area, that constituent council is formally consulted with their view being provided to the board when considering that concept. This principle shall also extend when final business cases are put forward for approval, with the relevant approver being provided with the constituent council view after being formally consulted when they are making a decision. I specifically draw attention to the level of engagement and co-production has been taking place in the development of the SAF, as it was a key ask of the board for this particular element of improvement and has played a significant role in its development. The first step in the clearance of the SAF is consideration today by this committee. The next step is consideration formally by board on the 20th of September, where board will be asked at that meeting to approve the SAF for submission to government for consideration and clearance. It is a requirement that DLUC, the Department for Transport and the Department for Education provide clearance of the assurance framework, and this will be done against the requirements set out in the new English Devolution Accountability Framework. DLUC and its English Devolution Accountability Framework policy team have been engaged in the development of the SAF, and a timetable of clearance has been agreed with DLUC that will take place following the board meeting on the 20th of September, with confirmation of clearance and details of any amendments required to get that clearance reported to the board on the 29th of November. Today, you are asked to consider the draft SAF Appendix A and provide comment to be reported to board to assist its consideration. You are asked to endorse the SAF if you are satisfied that it can deliver the assurance and protections required by an assurance framework. You're also provided with an opportunity to comment on the draft and developing terms of reference for the proposed investment committee and the supporting investment panel set out in Appendices B and C, which are key elements of the proposed SAF process. These bodies will play a key role in assuring alignment between the CA's governance framework and its assurance framework. I would like to take this opportunity to put on record our thanks to Paul Med, Chief Exec of Fenland Council, who has been the Regional Chief Exec lead in developing the SAF. He has provided significant guidance throughout its development.
I'd also like to thank Councillor Murphy, the lead member for governance, who has provided a sounding board again throughout the development of the SAF. I therefore present the report and appendices to the committee and are happy to provide any clarifications or answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. Comments, questions?
Clearly, this is a substantial piece of work, and rather a lot to go through. I just had a couple of specific questions to ask. I'll put the microphone there. Well, I guess one concern, which I was reading in paragraph 5.1.7, there's the statement that the SAF is applied flexibly and proportionately, depending upon the level of risk and associated with a project or program. So I fully understand that you need to adjust how you. It's not a one size fits all. What concerns me is the phrasing there potentially provides a way of, or it's not clear to me what the governance is around that. So I'm used more to the terminology of tailoring when we have some sort of framework, that you tailor a framework, but then that usually has some sort of governance around that to get that, to have that sort of signed off. And so I guess my first query is, how do we ensure that that is used appropriately and not misused? The other question I'll ask, I'd like to understand underlying this is, I think the document is very good in terms of determining those, for example, the different stages that the projects need to go through and who needs to make those decisions. Are there any supporting documents, checklists, or so on to ensure that those decisions are made in a consistent way? So I guess generally what I would expect to see behind this framework is when we're looking, for example, to move a project forward, there's a series of criteria, that standard set of criteria against which decisions are made, and whether do we have that sort of more detailed level of support behind that?
Yeah, if I can come back. So on the first point, thank you for that. I'm happy to take away and utilise the use of the word tailoring. So in regards to the sort of proportionality, etc., that is determined obviously by sort of two things. The first of that is the level of approval, financial approval, and depending upon the level of approval, there are different steps and different documents and different criteria that would have to obviously be applied to the development and approval of that business case. In phase A, through the concept phase, there is also an element where you assess and determine your business case development routes, and this needs to be set out in the concept paper. Now, there is guidance and criteria that goes alongside each route, and when I say routes, this is the business case route. So whether that be an OBC to an FBC, or maybe like a business justification case, or you need a program case, etc. There is clear guidance around which route you need to take, and that is part of the SAF guidance, a huge amount of guidance that sits behind this framework, which sort of leads me to respond to the second element of your question. So, for example, every process, every document, etc., within the SAF has its own supporting guidance, its own criteria, its own checklists, as you said. So, for example, as you go through the SAF phase A, there is a financial checklist for the financial team to use. And so you can tick off certain considerations and evidence as they go through consideration of those concepts. The same applies to legal. And we have similar checklists in the latter stages for wider areas of the combined authority going into communications, procurement, etc. We also are developing supporting checklist criteria checklists for the proportionate application of Green Book. So as you go up the scale again, and you don't have to meet all criteria within Green Book if you are a low finance project, but there will be clear guidance again about what you do need to meet, and an element of assurance to check that within the phase 2, the development phase, is the assurance observation report. That will be a project management office tool where they can check off the maturity of a business case. Has it delivered and developed all of those elements required in the business case development phase? And they can give a view on that and highlight red flags if they feel they have some concerns, which can then be addressed before that then moves forward to the approvals phase. As an additional element of assurance as well, we've thrown in that when a business case is developed, before it can enter the approval phase, the relevant exec director within the combined authority must approve that it does so. Therefore, they take on responsibility for that business case and its content. So they must be assured that it meets all requirements, provides all information, has been developed appropriately, because they will be the ones held to account in the approvals phase when that document is being approved. And this again was a key ask from the constituent councils throughout the development of this process to make sure we had a CA lead at a very high level to drive that through the approvals. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Just to add to Jodie's comments there as well, just mention that even if, of course, this does get approval on the 29th of November, having been through DLUC, we don't just flick a switch on the 30th of November and suddenly this becomes process and everybody knows what they're doing in relation to it. The guidance that's been developed, there'll be a huge amount of training that's undertaken there, and awareness raising, both with officers, with the various members on the committees that will form part of the governance process to move this forward, and indeed with members from constituent councils and officers of constituent councils and other stakeholders as well. So there will be an awful lot of implementation that follows final approval on the 29th of November. We're currently working up an implementation plan as well, on the assumption that hopefully it will receive approval at that stage. So hopefully that helps to answer your question as well, Councillor Inskip.
This seems an extremely comprehensive bit of work. The only thing I was struggling in my mind was the difference between concept papers and what I know as outline business cases, and then subsequently development of, it talks about business case. So could somebody just explain, Jodie, the difference between those and where external consultation fits into all of this? And then is there a role or not for the Audit and Governance Committee to look at the things which the investment panel will be considering at some stage, not individual projects presumably, but the work generally of the investment committee, investment panel? Thank you. No, sorry, investment committee.
Thank you, Councillor. So the concept is something we specifically developed at the request following feedback from our constituent authorities. It's for that initial phase where you would normally have a PID, a project initiation document. And the ask was that we had a concept paper in place that would start off with slightly less information you require for a PID, so we don't discourage ideas and proposals, but it would develop throughout the phase A process to get to the point where it was almost more of an SOBC, a strategic outline business case. And so we had that fully developed for all proposals that would then be considered by the board, proposals that are concepts. Things like the OBC, for example, that comes in phase 2 in the business case development phase. So the reason for the phasing, when that was a specific ask for constituents, was to make sure that we are getting the right information at the right points in that initial consideration initiation phase. So if I can sort of talk through that phase maybe in a little bit more detail, the concept paper in effect has sort of three sections. Section A is the initial information you might fill in for an idea or a project proposal. And we needed to make that very, very simple and not onerous, because we're looking to encourage not just suggestions from within the combined authority and our constituent authorities, but it needs to also be open to sort of the voluntary sector, businesses, across community groups across the region as well. Section 2 of that paper is about making sure we have an internal process to support development of the concept paper and align it to strategic fit, making sure it fits with our corporate plan, and having a process within that to pick up consideration where it is outside the corporate plan. And then section 3 was then about really then developing it into a much more detailed concept paper where you've got much more detailed financial information, project management information, risk consideration, and a better detailed strategic fit, which can then better inform the board when they are then considering whether that is something that should be cleared for in-year development, or whether it's something they might want to add to the pipeline for development at a latter stage. So we made sure we engage with all of those audiences, board at the end, the people who potentially would be filling that paper in at the front end, and then our own CMT. And from that, we've worked out criteria and questions, which are then reflected in that concept paper.
Okay, thanks, Jodie. Where does consultation fit in, and is there a role or not for the Audit and Governance Committee in any of this?
Thank you for that. So yes, if board approve the SAF and to have the investment committee, then of course we've already discussed with Edwina a constitutional review to see the impact upon the rest of our governance framework. And you are right, there would potentially be a role for the Audit and Governance Committee in the oversight of the investment committee's application of some elements of its core role. Certainly in regards to making sure that you're assured the relevant processes are in place for the investment committee to undertake its role.
If I may just add to what Jodie said, I think the other thing as well is there's a huge amount of work gone into the development of the single assurance framework, and there've been lots of comments from a whole set of people. Jodie's done a phenomenal work, and it will get DLUC input as well. But we won't actually know until after November, when we really start to operationalise it. Is it going to work exactly as it's planned to do? We hope it will, because there's been an awful lot of work gone into it. But there may be some ultimately tweaks and changes that are required to enable it to function effectively. So again, the view of Audit and Governance Committee in relation to any potential changes that may be needed, I think, and a regular review of the SAF will be important down the track as well. And we'd probably want to build in plenty of regular reviews of the initial operations before then building in a regular, initially maybe annually, and then moving beyond that to yearly review, because it is such a major change in terms of the way that we operate our assurance process through here. I think that's fair to say, isn't it, Jodie?
Yes, absolutely, Nick. And just to touch on that, that was a specific request by the regional chief execs of constituent authorities. There's obviously accepted there's an annual review of the assurance framework, which is an Audit and Governance Committee role. But the chief execs from across the region have asked that there is more regular 6-month detailed analysis of the implementation of the SAF for a minimum of the first 18 months of its operation, before then moving to just the regular annual review by the Audit and Governance Committee. And to support the Audit and Governance Committee in its future role, there are the M10 group at the moment is developing guidance and criteria to support audit committee functions in how they hold to account and review assurance frameworks in the future.
Thank you, Chair. Jodie, maybe I'm just unnecessarily confused because of the amount of information I've tried to absorb, but I'm looking at page 7, 2-3, the strategic framework, and then on the left-hand side of illustration A, there's a whole series of source areas for ideas, for new money, for devolution requirements, and then you've got the 4 priority areas: mayoral, regional business, constituent council, partner and stakeholder priorities. Now, that's an incredibly large scoop of information that's coming into the strategic planning and prioritization process. And I'm just a bit confused about hierarchies here and about how one's going to prioritize something that's very clearly going to be a mayoral priority with something that the local charities come up with, or some new idea that's come maybe from an individual councillor that wants to bring to you. I'm trying to grasp at how this process works to give these sort of ideas the hierarchy into the strategic planning and prioritization process, please.
Thank you, Councillor. So the purpose of the illustration there is to demonstrate that there are numerous feeds that go into the strategic planning and prioritization process, which is a requirement that we need to demonstrate in our SAF, that we are taking on board all of those elements. The strategic planning and prioritization process is currently in development within the organisation. And that will be presented to an upcoming meeting of LSM, I believe, as part of the development there. There are proposals and options about how they go about prioritisation. From a SAF perspective, our view is about we need to make sure that the subsequent processes all pick up the golden thread of the objectives and the intended deliverables. So we are spending money. We're putting our resources in delivering those deliverables, rather than maybe developing projects that are less aligned to those corporate objectives that the combined authority has determined. I believe that prioritisation exercise, as it is developed, will come to other committees in that development process. The diagram that's set up there is simply about us demonstrating to government how we almost plug the SAF into that prioritisation process. So the top levels, all the information you can see, the different priority feeds for consideration, having that evidence base through state of the region, the devolution deal, and of course looking at our existing projects. That's all part of the strategic planning process. The bits below, the new ideas, proposals, new opportunities, because of the way we've set up the SAF and specifically designed the concept paper, where we have this section A that captures core initial information about an idea, that can then also feed into the strategic planning and prioritisation process to determine what kind of project should we be looking to deliver those objectives. With that, obviously, that concept paper at phase running into more detail if it's an in-year proposal, and we already have a corporate plan.
And if I could just mention as well that there's a paper going to overview and scrutiny onto the main board, 18th of September overview and scrutiny, 20th of September main board, looking at the revised corporate planning and the MTFT process for this year. So that effectively started to pick up a number of the issues that will come through the strategic planning and prioritisation process, but we haven't yet fully defined that particular process that sits within here. So effectively, we're working on the SAF. We've also got an improved MTFP and corporate planning process, and we're also starting to work out how we actually take those inputs that come into the jury shown on the left-hand side here, and then prioritise those in future years. And that will be part of the work we do when we start to look at the implementation of this through in future years there. So think of it as sort of set of building blocks almost, and some of the building blocks we've defined now, and some have still got a little bit of work to be done on them. So if that's helpful.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Chair. So I suppose the first thing to say is that an FDC council, I'm quite au fait with Paul Mead's rigour that he applies onto this. I had a good read through the documents here, and I think for me, sort of summarising what the ask of, I believe, this committee is, and I wrote it down very carefully here, and it was for me, the document it demonstrates very clearly how the combined authority will achieve compliance and adherence with the National Local Growth Assurance Framework and the English Devolution Accountability Framework. So I think that is what the objective of the document is, and I think it sets out exactly how it will achieve that. And given, as you said, it will be tweaked and it will be developed, and the implementation is more critical, but I think it achieves its requirement. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wondering, given that in future more and more of our funding will be sort of our ability to fit in with where the government wants to go in terms of they're setting up a particular direction with funding attached to that. Do you think the process we have here is comparable with other combined authorities in terms of, it would be unfortunate if we created a sort of process that means that we're never in time to, get the latest idea and the latest money from government?
I'm sure Jodie will give a more detailed answer to this, but actually this should help us to do that, because what it will do is create a pipeline of projects that are ready, oven ready effectively, when government comes out with money potentially for us to bid for, that historically we sometimes haven't had through those individual areas, are quite as ready as we want them to be. And actually what it's doing is it's actually taking on best practice in other combined authority areas and building on that even further. So this will be effectively where I think other combined authorities will be moving to, from our knowledge, over the course of the next year or so themselves, because it's a requirement of DLUC and government that everyone's now got, an up-to-date single assurance framework that links in with the requirements of EDAF, the English Devolution Accountability Framework as well. So everybody's going to be working on this one through there. And I think actually we're probably slightly in advance of some other combined authorities in terms of the work that we've done on it, but it will actually help us, come back to your point, in terms of looking for funding and pulling down more funding from government. Jodie, I don't know if you want to add more detail to that.
No, just to confirm what Nicky said there, it would put us in a much stronger position to react as and when government funded pots become available and need to be spent really, really quickly. As you said, we'll have that pipeline of things that are already developed and ready to go when funding becomes available, or have already been approved. They've been through phase A and now just can go straight into development. So it should put us in a much better position. As Nick said, we've made sure we've engaged constantly with the M10 Assurance Group. So we are at best practice, and we are going to be the first council or combined authority to be to go through the EDAF Assurance Framework Assessment process with DLUC. So at this moment in time, the other mayoral combined authorities are looking to see what the outcome of that is, and are very interested to see what the feedback from DLUC is, with the intent, I believe, to rewrite their own based around how we propose to the one before you in Appendix A.
I think Edna would like to say something.
Yeah, just to add a couple of points, I really welcome this group looking at this assurance framework. It is fundamental, it is the guts really of delivery capability for the combined authority. And that is a huge risk if we don't get it right. I mean, that is, you know, it's existential, it's fundamental. So it is really appropriate, I think, for you to have eyes on it and question it. And obviously, as Jodie has said, there is then, if and when this is adopted, there is then a constitutional role to review it properly. I would also say it really is very fundamental in terms of setting out, you know, it clarifies the roles and responsibilities of board versus the investment committee, this new committee and new approach to dealing with the development and delivery of projects. And it's again, it's a fundamental thing for the board to really engage with these what you might call rules of engagement, because previously the board has sort of re-litigated every issue, and that's been a real problem. So I think this is absolutely key to delivery, and even if it's an additional ask this time, I think it's been really welcome, and I welcome the comments. And I have to say, Jodie's done some fantastic work on this.
Thank you, Ed. Could you say a little bit about the investment committee and the investment panel? You say it's developing, and you wanted comments on the developing stage, but something about the genesis and purpose and where the shareholder committee fits in.
Of course, Chair. So the investment panel is in effect the technical officer group that would support the investment committee and help support the relevant phases within the single assurance framework. The investment panel has a key role in preparing the reports in phase A that would go on a quarterly basis to board with a recommendation on concepts and which ones should or shouldn't maybe be included in the MTFP for that year, or should be parked on a pipeline for later, or even refused. It is there to give technical assurance based around the 5-case model within Green Book. So it will give technical advice to the investment committee and subsequently to boards, depending upon the level of financial approval being sought, which will then hopefully focus the member role on the investment committee and on board onto the political consideration of those projects, whether it hasn't strong enough strategic fit as set out and will deliver those deliverables in. So there will be a clearer roles and responsibilities in regard to those approval lines. The investment committee is it's a preferred model as we understand it from DLUC within combined authority settings. It exists in the majority of the other MCAs. Those we engaged with throughout the process who didn't have one reported that they were looking to move to one as soon as they possibly could. The aim is to develop a particular skill set within that committee, so there's a better understanding of Green Book and particular elements of Green Book in their considerations, and also to develop that skill set around things like change management, etc., so it can be consistently applied to all phases within the assurance framework. The ask from board was that we didn't create a new committee to be added to the governance framework, and so the workaround we've developed with board informally is to expand the role of the shareholder board into an investment committee. Now, that is the element we're obviously still working on, because we need to make sure we don't lose any elements or benefits from having the shareholder board. So we're working closely with Edwina to make sure we develop the investment committee so that it can deliver both those functions, the investment committee function and the shareholder board function, and it has the appropriate membership, etc., in line with those functions that are developed. So there's still a little bit of work to be done around that. We've had the principle of the investment committee approved informally by board via LSM, and DLUC have encouraged us to include that within our governance framework and within this proposal, and that is why we have done so. We believe it is the best way of delivering continued assurance and appropriate roles and responsibilities aligned to the single assurance framework, and make sure they are reflected in the governance framework itself.
In the covering note, you talk about would we have a view on whether these proposals meet value for money needs. That's quite a broad ask. Could you give us your view on where it covers the value for money requirements?
Absolutely. So value from what we have done is we've developed phases that include value for money consideration criteria in all phases. So in phase A, we have developed early VFM considerations that we believe are appropriate to make sure that they are being considered at a very early stage within the development of concepts. In phase 2, we have made sure we are Green Book compliant and we are meeting all value for money requirements set out, and we are delivering that proportionately. And we are developing guidance around value for money as well to assist those developing those business cases and those within our PMO who will be giving them support in the development of their business cases. We also set out how we will meet DFT web tag value for money criteria, which is an additional element for transport schemes. That is again covered within the single assurance framework. When we then get into approvals, value for money key lines of inquiry are included in our guidance that we will be giving to both the investment panel, so they will be looking to determine a view on that, and to our politicians on the investment committee and on the board. In addition to that, I should also say we're looking for all business cases will require a Section 73 officer value for money sign off as part of the development of their business case. So I think we have a very thorough approach to ensuring the appropriate value for money considerations. One thing I would add to that is that is a tolerance within the single assurance framework. So for projects where they get a benefit cost ratio score that suggests value for money is perhaps not particularly strong, there is a requirement for the combined authority board to then become the approver of that business case, which allows the combined authority board to consider whether non-monetized benefits outweigh the potential value for money benefits. And that is a role for board, as they are the ones, of course, who decide and approve our strategic objectives. And so it is felt right that they were the ones who could do that. So I believe we are fully covered, and our early engagement with DLUC suggests that they are satisfied with that, although, of course, we now go through the formal testing once board consider it on the 20th.
Thank you, Jodie. I've looked up endorsement, and it means approve, which we can't, and it means support. So I think if we take support as being the meaning of endorsement, I ask us, do we support and endorse this approach? Okay. Then what happens next? The scale of it, I don't think apart from the fact we're lots and lots of words, I hadn't realised the organisational scale of change that this is producing without this benefit of this conversation. So I think what we would like in the new calendar year would be an update on where things stand following it going through Whitehall, and the thinking that's gone on is how are you going to make this happen, and how will you know it is happening? Okay. And then I just think, thank you, Jodie, for being a master of your subject and for taking us through so well. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Chair. And I should just add, it's a requirement that we take to the 29th of November board meeting a full implementation plan on how the SAF will be implemented, and that meeting it will be decided when the SAF itself will be implemented. Obviously, dependent upon the level of support that's required to do that.
Okay, thanks very much and good luck. Next item is the internal progress report. And I welcome Dan, who's able to be with us today, because he's trying to be in 4 places at once spatially today, I think, but we've got him.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully a fairly straightforward paper for you today from me. So page 179 of your pack, this is our progress report. You'll recall this is a standing report for the committee. So the 2 things this report should do is A, appraise you of where we are in the progress of the internal audit plan. You can see we reference actually 2 financial years in this one. And secondly, what I would do is say, is there anything significant here coming out of our work year to date that might impact the year-end opinion? So I think on the latter point, there isn't, in relation to the 23-24 plan of work, anything that will negatively impact that. The caveat to that is we've delivered 1 piece of work, 1 final report. Since your last meeting, you can see we've got a very heavy sort of second half of the financial year to deliver our plan. So in summary then, in terms of the key messages that I've got within this paper, there were 2 reports that remained outstanding for 22-23 in draft. 1 of those has been finalised on the Affordable Housing Grant Programme. I wasn't proposing to go through the details of that. You've seen the summary headline findings in previous meetings in my annual report. The 1 remaining draft from last year's programme on Treasury Management and Accounts Payable, we are simply waiting for just the officer responsible and implementation date. So we are expecting that. We've had some sort of further dialogue on the content of the report, but we're expecting that to be finalised fairly imminently. So in terms of the 23-24 plan, as I mentioned, we've delivered the budget setting and control review. That's been finalised. That was a positive opinion, so reasonable assurance was provided there. We agreed the 1 medium, 4 low priority actions, but I think the main point for the committee to note is that was a positive opinion. I think the other thing that I would just draw your attention to, it's referenced both within Appendix B and Appendix C. So in Appendix B, you can see the timelines proposed for the remaining reviews, and we've got 3 kicking off this month. The business continuity planning review kicking off in October. You will, however, note, and I know you've shown interest in previous meetings in sort of changes to the plan and the timeline of the plan. I've tried to be as transparent as possible on page 184. There have been some amendments that have been agreed with officers. I've laid those out just so the committee can sort of see what they are. But we, both my team and indeed officers, are very aware of the need to tighten that turnaround time of once we've issued a draft report, getting that finalised and through to the committee as final reports. Fairly light agenda item from me, Chair, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dan. We're asked to note the report, so do we have any comments or questions on that basis? No, thank you very much indeed. Then we'll move on to item 9, which is external audit. It's an oral update. Mark?
So I think it's a 2-fold update. So 1 on the audit of 21-22 financial statements and value for money, and then there's a future-looking sector-wide update for you. So in relation to the first one, the audit is underway, progressing well, expect to be concluding with the fieldwork in the next week to 10 days, still with the view to bringing the financial statements opinion audit results report to your November meeting. I think it's fair to say there's been a little bit of tension on either side, primarily driven by the larger sample sizes as a result of having to reduce our materiality level because of the well-known issue linked to our significant value for money risk and what that means for the control environment and audit risk overall. But working our way through that with clearly Nick and colleagues. But clearly our value for money reporting and our ability to conclude on that is dependent on being able to see the outcome of the independent investigation. And given some of the narrative in today's report about that likely timing, that may not therefore coincide with November. So we'd have to consider the impact on whether we issue an audit opinion on the financial statements and defer the value for money one, or we defer the two to go together, given December's not a million miles away from November, but working through the timing. I'll pause there in case there are any questions, and then I'll do the next. Okay, so the next bit is kind of quite a broad subject on where is public sector audit going, driven by lots of reviews over the last 2 years that has fundamentally stated that public sector audit market and the mechanics behind it is broken, leading to the minister appearing before the Public Accounts Committee on the 17th of July and issuing a letter on the 18th of July to all chief finance officers and chief executives. And in that letter, he had two key focuses. One, to provide maximum assurance over outstanding years of audit where possible to do so. But the second key principle being to reset the local government audit market as quickly as possible. Clearly, as a firm, we have equally written out to chief executives and chief finance officers after that, endorsing the letter and our support for the principles of it. But whilst there are those two knowns, there are a lot of unknowns about the how it can be implemented. And the minister's letter said there would be a lot of work going on over the summer to help that. That work is still going on. We're involved in a number of panels led by the National Audit Office for the mechanisms. But what is known is that in a industry where there is a finite resource, you cannot do both of those priorities at the same time. So there is not enough audit resource to close out all old audits and then move on to start resetting the market in a timeline that would be required to reset it. And guidance is not due out until the end of December. And that would mean a significant impact on when you could reset the market. So for example, if the precedent is to focus on the most recent financial information at that point, that would be the 23-24 financial year, because you need 6 months to plan an audit to be able to execute an audit to sign off by a September deadline. The amount of outstanding audits currently would not mean any firm could start that audit work in January 24 to be able to achieve that. So you're trying to balance two things. So clearly part of the guidance that comes out is about how you manage down that pot to be able to start resetting it. And it is that guidance that we're waiting on to be able to make informed decisions. What it means potentially, though, is there may be some audits that are not started or not concluded, and auditors may move to a disclaimed audit opinion as a form of moving through to be able to reset the market to start the playing field on a level basis going forward. Clearly that has its own ramifications, which the minister is, I believe, understanding of, but clearly needs to understand the quantum of engagement and audits that would be. So clearly we are dependent on a lot of guidance coming out from the FRC, the Financial Reporting Council, as the shadow system leader for local public audit going forward.
Thank you, Mark. Any comments or questions? You didn't mention money. Is money an issue here? Is it the lack of money being spent on audits which means there isn't the resource there making it attractive?
I think it's fair to say that audit fees have not allowed investment in audit and indeed the financial profession as a whole. So I think it's the same on the practitioner side over the same period. And that has been one of the levers that has had led to the position we are in today. It's not the only one, for clearly, but it has been a key plank of it.
Just to echo that, if I may, I think nationally what's happened over probably a long period of time, maybe even as many as 20 years, is that many trainee schemes that were around previously have been either reduced or stopped by local authorities and by wider organisations. And therefore, I think, as Mark rightly says, there's been an issue in terms of people coming through the finance side as well as the audit side, who are adequately trained and have that ability and capacity to be able to do this. And that we're seeing obviously within the audit market there, but from discussions we've had within this audit governance committee as well, you'll know that it's not always easy to attract good accountants or good finance staff, again, for the same reason. So it is a national issue and one that has been coming around, I think, for a long time. Thank you.
Can I just pick up on that? Is there a similar issue within local authorities and the combined authority in particular in producing the accounts, which the external auditors then review? I'm particularly concerned that we should not stop producing statutory accounts. I am worried when we are told by PSAA that the audit fees might increase substantially, and no doubt you can tell us what that might mean for the combined authority, and precisely how the government is planning to deal with the backlog of work. Because if it's not audited properly, we have no assurance as members that officers aren't, and using my phrase, cooking the books.
Not for the men.
So if I may, I mean, it is a huge issue in relation to the capacity. I think Mark alluded to earlier that, you know, with the additional work that the external audit need to do this year around 21-22 accounts because of the materiality issues, that has caused pressures on both the internal team in the combined authority and I think Mark's audit team coming through from there, because of course they're having to look at far more detail than they would otherwise. And of course that's at a time when we're trying to pull together our budget process as well for next year. So there's a lot of pressure going on there. We've coped with it. Going back to the issues that we talked previously about, you know, sort of the sustainability of the finance team and its business continuity, but it's not been easy through there, and that will continue to be the case, you know, as and when requirements come in. But we will absolutely prioritise making sure that we get the statutory accounts done. And you know, producing those will be a clear remit for us in the future. It's a requirement for me as Section 73 officer, and you know, I'd want to keep those requirements through there. And there is a bigger issue than this, and Mark will know that in terms of exactly what you said. If accounts are effectively disclaimed, i.e., we would consider that to be in many ways a qualification, because of course the auditors can't give that, you know, opinion, not having potentially done the full audit on some accounts if that comes through. Then there is that question in terms of how can any organisation, its governance, really know exactly whether or not those accounts were fully accurate or not. So it's a far wider issue than purely us as a combined authority, and it's one I know that the that SIP for itself has made a number of you know, raised a number of concerns with the government in relation to this. But I think the issue is to find a pragmatic solution that meets all requirements, and it's difficult to do that at the moment, I think, without having some form of maybe more limited audit that comes through. in terms of the future costs, we don't yet know exactly what they're likely to be, but we're making some estimates on those. But when I get more detail on that, I'll make sure that's reported through this committee, and obviously as part of our medium-term financial plan, it will be picked through the costs.
Thank you. In my umpty years on audit committees, the most exciting bit is the fees. But I think a broader view might be needed in future. Any other questions for Mark? No, Mark, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to date on both sides of that coin. We now move on to item 10, which is an update on the procurement review, and we're asked to note the documents and what will be happening in future. And it's going to be introduced by Chantel, who's hopefully realised, having listened to us for a bit, we're not that bad. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. The purpose of this paper is just to provide this committee with an update on the progress being made against the procurement improvement work. The CA board approved the recommendations brought to this committee in June on the high-level action plan, as well as the recruitment of additional posts, and in July, the implementation of the procurement strategy and policy document, as well as the changes within the contract procedure rules. This was subject to the board receiving the guidance document. This is attached as Appendix A, and we are asking this committee to review the guidance document and provide feedback and comments before going to board on the 20th of September. With regards to the recruitment of additional posts, 3 out of the 5 posts have now been filled, with 1 role's recruitment still in progress, and then a decision has been taken internally to put 1 role on hold until a later date to allow the team to adjust and settle. There is an error in the paper at 2.4. Instead of Project Management Office, it should be reading Program Management Office. But with regards to the training, a training program has been sourced, which will be rolled out to the entire organization, and this will be mandatory for all staff to complete. Once the guidance document has gone through the CA board in September, our templates will be amended to reflect the recent changes, and training will be rolled out to the teams on the changes and how to complete the relevant documents before being uploaded to a central procurement hub. Work has been undertaken for a corporate performance dashboard, which includes an initial KPI for the procurement department, which is set to reduce the number of waivers submitted. As the new policies and processes are embedded into the organization, additional KPIs will be set, linking back to the procurement strategy and policy documents, which will be continuously monitored. For this committee to note, the approved internal audit program for 23-24 includes a review of procurement to enable time for new policies and processes being used across the organization to embed. The performance of these will be monitored. The review is scheduled for Q4. Besides the grammatical errors in the guidance document, which I have noted, I do welcome any comments against this paper.
Thank you very much, Chantel. I think anecdotally I heard ages ago that practices weren't consistent or embedded across the organisation as far as procurement. This is a culmination of a great deal of work. Have we got, do members have points to make or questions to ask?
Thank you, Chair. It really revolves around the urgent decisions. It's always that vulnerable bit where you've got to spend money and you may have to severely truncate your processes to get the things through. And just to look at the assurance around that, and I'd like to understand that a bit more if that's possible. Something I look at in my own local authority about CMDNs and decisions made outside of due scrutiny and how you cope with that.
I am going to delegate that upwards.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Cole. So in the Constitution, there are already set procedures for when urgent decisions can be made. and those decisions are limited to a number of people. So, for example, the chief executive, really, and the mayor, sometimes with mayoral decision notices. And when those decisions are made, a decision notice is published on the CPCA's website, which allows anybody, especially overviewing scrutiny, to call in that decision. Before those decisions are made, the chair of overviewing scrutiny will be consulted, or ask for the approval depending on when that decision needs to be made. So there are safeguards in the Constitution itself as to who can make urgent decisions. If there are any decisions that need to be made quite urgently, and for example, maybe the chief exec is not around, then obviously we'll go to the mayor to do that. But the expectation is that with the new guidance and the new CPR rules, that will happen less often. One of the people, one of the roles that we're still recruiting for is a contract manager, and their job will be to monitor the contracts that the CPCA is involved with, to make sure that 6 months in advance, 9 months in advance, the officers who manage those contracts and individual teams are consistently reminded that this contract is up for renewal in 6 months and 9 months. So we hope that all these safeguards will reduce to a really minimal level, to position where we'll have to make urgent decisions. I hope that answers your question.
I think so, and I think it's the 151 that's always got that heavy hand of authority over some of these things to make sure that these processes happen according to procurement and they don't fall outside that, and you're forced to go down this line of urgent decision making, which that's where problems arise inevitably. And I'm very pleased to see that there's a robust procurement process in place that will hopefully cope with some of these things that have happened in the past. But that's great. Thank you.
Any other comments? Does anybody have any comments on the guidance note that's in front of us? I thought, I wouldn't want to change the words, I thought it was nicely presented in a way which you might want to actually read it, as opposed to being long paragraphs, because it does seem to me that when people are in the reality is you look at the guidance, but you're not understanding which bits you have to take out of it. The layout you have helps, I think, a reader to work their way through the bit they need to pay attention to. So that's good. Nick wants to say something.
Thank you. I mean, a couple of things I could just to personally thank Chantel and the team for all the work that's gone on to this, but also just to mention as well that just in terms of internal consistency for the committee, he mentioned here the internal audit. Which I think was originally planned for Q4 this year. I think it's dropped off at the moment by the looks of it, the internal audit plan. So we need to make sure, I think, Dan, that goes back on. My apologies on that one. I hadn't noticed and done a read across on that one. So we have to tweak again the internal audit plan because it's important, I think, that the procurement review does take place in Q4. So just for consistency, if everybody's noticed that, we'll make that change. Thank you.
And how confident are you, Chantel, that this is all going to work?
Fairly confident.
Because?
I am not the procurement team. I have a team, which allows me to focus more on the processes and policies and making sure that officers are getting this correctly. Our teams, well, my team, each officer will be embedded into the relevant directorate to make sure that they're involved and know what's coming their way.
That's just the insight that we need. That gives more assurance than reading all these bits of paper. So thank you, and I wish you well. I think we do need to. I know you say the paper, the process, the thing may come back to us again if there's significant changes, but I think from a committee's point of view at this juncture, we look to the internal audit review, and perhaps if members we might have a little bit more in-depth report back from you, Dan, when you do that, given the nature of the subject, and maybe Chantel can join us at that stage, because that's where we'll get an understanding of how it's turned into operational practice. Does that sound okay? You'll be happy with that, Dan?
I am. My only nervousness, given the team is currently being embedded, is quite how much sample testing we will be able to perform. What I don't want to come in and tell you something that was in place pre the new team being put in, and therefore potentially coming out with a negative opinion which might not be reflective of the direction of travel. I think my only hesitation, just in terms of Q4, and I think we can try and back end to late Q4, is that we just have enough sample size to actually look at the new arrangements that have been put in place, the new team that's been put in place, to actually give you a true assessment of what has been implemented and has changed, rather than perhaps looking at something that you already have had reported to you was perhaps not fit for purpose previously. So I think that would be my only caveat in terms of the discussion that's gone on and the timing of our work.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful. So should we leave it then, please, that the executive and internal audit keep open-minded on the question of timing, because there's no value in yesterday's work. We want an insight into the new arrangement. If that means it slips to the next year, then so be it. We're comfortable with that? Okay, thank you very much, Chantel. We may go. The last two, the last three items on the agenda now, if I got it right, are all about us. So that means we won't do it in 25 minutes. It will take about 3 hours. So what we have next is we asked that a look be taken at how audit committees are structured and arranged in the other combined authorities. And the item 11 is a report from Nick, who has gathered the information and presented it to us. Nick.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, I won't dwell on this, but just effectively, we request information from all other male combined authorities, with the exception of the Greater London Authority, which we felt was probably not too similar in terms of size and context. But we got it from the other 8. We had 5 direct replies. The other 3 we checked for their website because they didn't reply to us directly. And I've put the key information that came back from them in terms of the appendix, Appendix A, for you to look at, and raise a number of questions there as well that you may wish to consider as a committee, both in terms of initially the total membership of the committee. That varies enormously between individual MCAs. Interestingly, the number of independent persons who are members of the committee varies a lot as well. Everyone has at least 1 member. A lot have a couple, but some have as much as 5 members who are independent. Independent persons coming along there. So again, just something to bear in mind, and should we be thinking about that as a committee? I know the report comes shortly about the independent person on the committee, but again, that might be just something to bear in mind. One audit committee's got a representative on there on the audit committee. Of course, we've got our business board. On other committees that we've got, like the thematic committees, and indeed our main board, we've got a representative from the business board. Do the audit committee think it might be useful to have a representative from the business board on the audit governance committee? Don't know, just a question again coming through from there. Similarly, in terms of the numbers of meetings, this doesn't actually vary that much. It's pretty much 4 meetings a year everyone has. Well, I think one's got 3 meetings. We currently have 6 meetings of the Audit and Governance Committee. Again, obviously, we've had a number of those additionally because of the best value noted, because of the workload coming up. But depending on where we are next year, for next municipal year, is it worth us considering maybe reducing that number to the 4 that is done in other local authorities? Just a question again for the committee to consider through there. But we've talked already about deep dives. We've had our first deep dive today. 2 other audit committees, Greater Manchester and South Yorkshire, hold deep dives around risk. The others don't. But if we're doing the deep dives around risks and continuing to do that, for instance, South Yorkshire have a separate subcommittee that looks at the deep dives. Is that something that you'd want to consider or not through there? Just another question through that. there's an issue about what's in a name. Obviously, some people think that it's important when I've talked to them because actually they've put risk and they've put standards in their names because they think it's important that other people know what that committee does. I'm not necessarily convinced that the name has a lot to go with it, but I thought it was useful again just to understand whether this committee should think about that in the future. There's an issue around some of the combined authorities having pools of reserve members to do additional work as and when required in audit and governance. Just a question about whether or not that should be considered by this committee. And then finally, something I do think that might well be useful. It's not a question we ask the committees, but we know happens in our review and scrutiny committee. Is there value in potentially the chair and the vice chairs of the audit committee here having occasional discussions with the chair and the vice chairs of audit committees from the other MCAs to be able to actually pick up practice what might be happening elsewhere. We know that happens with our review and scrutiny committee chair and vice chair. So actually, could that be helpful, for audit and governance committee as well? So a series of questions there, not just even necessarily debate them today, but I'm happy to pick up any questions. I was just chatting to the chair earlier. It might be easier to do this maybe by, I almost said, your questionnaire round members of the committee to get their views first, before then perhaps produce some further proposals at the November meeting. But I'm very happy to take your views and guidance on how you want to take this one forwards.
Thank you very much, Dick. Yeah.
I think given the time and the number of questions, I like the questionnaire idea because I think that hopefully that will find that there are some points that we're very much aligned on, and therefore we don't need to discuss in this forum, and it'll hopefully will identify that, say, the more not necessarily contentious, but the points that need more discussion. But I think it is, there were definitely some useful questions there. I certainly on the frequency one, looking at where we are on the agenda and how much we've got at this meeting, I think in the short term, trying to squeezing that into 4 meetings should be is a challenge, but it ought to be, let's say, an aspiration of where we want to get to as we work through the current issues and hopefully settle down to a more sort of business as usual sort of approach.
Yeah, I agree. I think the idea of the questionnaire would be really, really good. I just wonder as well if it would be worth as a group us having call it an offline, online discussion around some of those aspects as well. Because I think we mentioned it a few times here today, and I think for me, it's getting the committee to focus on the how questions as opposed to the why questions. So through again stuff that I do at FDC, we've had quite a lot of audit training there as well, and that's something that's really come through very, very clearly and strongly in the training that we've had there.
Okay, no one likes all over in 2 minutes. I think we remember in one of the first, or the first, I think, Independent Improvement Board reports was about the stability and the abilities of the audit committee, and this is part of that work of trying to make it better. Well, make it more professional, I suppose, which we know is difficult in the sense of the turbulence with the way the electoral system works and people and how people are appointed. I think there's 3 new members this year, 4 new members last year. So trying to get continuity and we'll come back to that. I think with the independent person is not easy. And I don't think we need to rush at this. I think we need to be steadily working our way through it, and so I think there's support for turning these questions into a questionnaire with a yes, no, strongly, just a standard thing, and not for essays, but a bit of comment. And if we can then sort the issues that need debate from the issues where we have a confluence of thinking, then I think absolutely right. We should have an online workshop to chew over the things that need debate. So if I could ask for a questionnaire process to be done with a view to having an outcome for our next meeting with some suggestions on the next steps. Are you comfortable with it? Good. And thank you very much, Nick, because I know that you personally put your hand to this, because it is it's a key element of the business of the combined authority, that the audit committee advice is sound as it can possibly be. Thank you. Right. No, well, I might go home for tea. And so then we come to the appointment of an independent person, and members will recall that I sought your support to withdrawing the paper that was going to go to the Combined Authority Board, because we needed to be clear in our minds between an independent councillor who joins us at the table, which is the offer which the Combined Authority Board made to us, which isn't somebody who, trying to get this in my mind, the way I see it is they would be at the table, but they wouldn't be a member of the committee and wouldn't be a member of the quorum, whereas an independent person, somebody like me, would be a member of the committee and therefore part of the quorum, and would meet the CPCA criteria of what an independent is about, which is bringing expertise which we wouldn't otherwise have, and that's quite separate from the question of an independent councillor sitting around the table. Can we deal with the independent councillor, Nick? Just could you tell us where we are on that, and then we can ask Edwina to introduce the paper.
Well, I think Jane Winner will probably be able to give you that detail as well. There's a report going to the 20th of September board, just requesting the change to the constitution that will be required to effect having an independent councillor on this committee, as was voted for and agreed at the meeting in June, I believe it was. And that I think that report, as planned, will then effectively put in the constitution that rather than having to effect constitution changes every time, it will then be up purely to this committee to decide each year whether it wants to have an independent councillor or not as a member of the committee. And if it does, then we can rapidly.
As joining us, not as a member.
Sorry, you're joining. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm getting my own terminology wrong. Thank you. Joining. Yes, as in terms of co-option. Thank you. I'm sure Edwina can explain it far, far better than I can, but that's where we are in terms of that final decision making. So that will be going to the board on the 20th of September.
Excellent. As a lesson of how complicated things at first glance look quite straightforward. We're going to talk about independent person, and Edwina will introduce it, and it is in regard, we should bear in mind that the CPCA guide position statement issued last year, which replaced one issued a few years before, is that there should be at least two on an audit committee. I just need to have you that in mind as you listen to what Edwina says. Edwina.
Thank you. Thank you. So yes, Nick has explained the issue of the independent councillor. So we're looking at an independent person, which is how the overview and scrutiny order refers to this person. So the independent person that we're looking at effectively is someone like the chair, John Pye. So there are 4 recommendations in the report. However, I do want to add a 5th recommendation to the report, and the recommendation is to seek your approval to recommend to the CPCA board to amend the constitution to say something to the effect that if there are 2 independent persons on this committee, one of them will be the chair. The reason is because the way the constitution is drafted at the moment, there is an automatic chairmanship for the one independent person. However, if we do have 2, 3 independent persons, depending on where this committee is going, there can only be one chair. So it will be up to this committee then to decide who the chair is. With your permission, I will add an additional recommendation to the report that's before you. So I wanted to deal with that first. So, I mean, I think the report is quite self-explanatory. What we're looking for is another independent person to ensure that there is an opportunity for similar succession. That person, as the chair has referred to, comes into this committee and can add value to this committee. So that's the reason for looking at an additional independent person. The other thing is, as part of this process, I have contacted the independent review panel, and both the remuneration of the present chair and the dependent person, because now we have another independent person coming in, will be looked at, and they will make a recommendation as to what the remuneration should be. So those are the main issues that I sort of wanted to draw out of the report today. I am open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Adina. Questions, comments?
Would your recommendation mean that the second independent person would become the vice chair?
I could comment on that, as I don't think they should. I think the advantage of a member as a vice chair is it provides an independent person with that political insight, which two independent people would not have. So I would perhaps do it the other way, that it should be clear either in whatever process we had or in the constitution that they wouldn't be the vice. But whether you need to write that down, but my recommendation is definitely not.
At the risk of offending you, Chair,
Let's write it down.
I think I take a different view, because if the purpose is to have succession, you might want to consider as a committee just for this year, the independent person being the vice chair, so that they at least have an opportunity to train, if I could use those words, on the job, as it were, before then you get another independent person. But obviously, I'm just a monitoring officer. I'm not a member of this committee.
No, I'm not offended. It just shows that we don't plan it beforehand.
Chair, it's not binary, is it? You can have two vice chairs.
No, I mean, these are the practicalities, but the political input is so important that I don't think there can be any havering on who the vice chair is. I think, if, on the other hand, if we agree that we should go ahead and recruit one to be a member of the committee to start in the next municipal year, which is what implicitly has to begin at a municipal year, then I would include my intention would have been to include the independent person in the pre-briefs that we have online with the team, because that is their point of handing over the baton. But I didn't see that needed a nomenclature to go with it. I think that would just be good business practice. But here's the vice chair.
Well, no, one of the current. I agree with you, but I think it's more important to put within the constitution or somewhere that we do anticipate this person is your successor, and as long as they are performing adequately. Now, whether you say we are minded that this person is the successor to become the chair in the future or not, I don't know. But that's what we will all have in mind when this person is appointed, based on what you've just said.
It is tricky, and it does require some thought. If I just remark, those who don't know, I applied to be a member of this committee. That was the advert. And I went through the interview and I was selected. And there's 4 meetings a year. I can go on holiday a lot. And then they rang me up and said, "Oh, by the way, you're the chair." So I wasn't even selected with that idea in mind. So we certainly need the qualities in the going out is somebody who has the capacity, has the competence to be a future chair. whether one wants to write anything in the constitution about that, I'd rather keep my powder dry, because if it didn't work, then you might want to go out in a year's time and still recruit. But if you guarantee the job before you've worked out whether it's going to suit, no. Yeah. No, I think we want to recruit people who know that they need to have the competence, and they could perhaps be chair, because the way it works, there has to be a criteria for the selection panel to take account of, which they didn't take account of in my time because it wasn't on the agenda. Do I take it then we're happy to seek a second independent person? Okay. And the intention would be that would do for that person to begin in the next municipal year. So that gives us a timeline for the recruiting process, some guidance in the paper regarding how we do the selection, and we need to get an amendment to the constitution that covers that point. And I think maybe it would be good to put in the constitution that a councillor should be the vice chair. I think because that does seem to me, it's that balance between being able to talk over business with a councillor for advice or separately, that's what I need. What's the mood music out there, or do we need to do something about it? It doesn't happen very often, but I think that's the really great value, and it reinforces the democratic side of the committee, not just a couple of people who've just parachuted in. Okay, good. Thank you very much, and thank you indeed. And lastly, talking about ourselves, is the work programme. Have you come up with some bright ideas to condense 6 meetings into 4? No. Okay. Has any comments on the work programme? All right.
We have today talked about adding the annual accounts to November, so that will extend November's meeting.
No, but not as if we're as well behaved as we are today, and we've done it all in 5 minutes to go. But yes, thank you. That's a good reminder. I'll put that in. Yeah. Okay. Fine. And so I'll close the meeting by saying that we meet again on the 17th of November at 10 o'clock in this very room. Those who haven't done their register of interests, don't leave without talking to Anne. Thank you. Bye.